This won't last. I set my eyes on her one time and I said, this surely won't last. I had just reported to our first work site in Victoria, Texas, 2 Saturdays ago, along with 5 strapping adults, all perfectly outfitted, booted, sunscreen lathered, and bug sprayed. And one 13-year-old girl who was dressed to go to the mall. She had on a t-shirt, those athletic shorts, and bright tennis shoes. And I looked at her and said, this won't last. And sure enough, 15 minutes into our first work assignment, every single adult was soaked to the skin. I mean, soaked to the skin from carrying branches and limbs and brush and tree trunks. Worse than the heat or the sweat or the sun, however, were the mosquitoes. Rob Harris had on a royal blue shirt. I looked up and suddenly he had turned to gray and black herringbone wool. There were 1,000 mosquitoes on his back biting him through his shirt. And I looked at that little girl and she had mosquitoes up and down both legs, on the backs of her arms, and all along her neck. And I said, whoa, this won't last. But by the end of that first work site, she was doing laps around all the adults, including one blustery preacher I know. She finished the work at that site, and the next one too, and the next one, and the last one. About mid-morning, I was so impressed, I said, Miss, could you tell me your name? And she said, well, my name is Sophia. And I began to chuckle because in Greek, that word means wisdom. And for us Christians, most wisdom comes from below. Unlike the rest of the world, our wisdom so often comes from below. It comes from what appears to be the weakest. Jesus bespeaks this unexpected path of wisdom when he is speaking to his followers. He wants to tell them what it will take for them to actually live in his alternative community. What does it take to live in the alternative community that he is establishing? To be able to see, perceive, and actually exist in the greater reality of God. And so in order to illustrate that, he tells them some pragmatic instructions. He says, if a brother or sister has sinned against you, then you go alone and tell them how they've hurt you. If that brother or sister listens to you, well, you've gained one. If they turn a deaf ear to you, should you then go get others and perhaps even an official from the church? But only after you've gone to them alone, because true wisdom comes from below. What looks like an act of weakness is actually an act of strength. Going to someone and telling they've hurt you. In the church, we don't rely on patriarchal overlords or fierce prelates. No, we believe that true wisdom comes from below, and that wisdom lasts. If you don't believe me, I want you to think about this woman I met at one of those luncheons, one of those benefit luncheons last fall. I'd never met her before, and we were sitting and kind of chatting before the speaker stood up at the podium. And she says, I want to tell you about my high school reunion. I said, okay, that sounds like fun. She says, yeah, it was my 25th. And of course I said the gallant thing, oh, you couldn't be that old. And she just nodded at me. But she said, I was so excited about my 25th high school reunion because I loved high school. I went to high school in the Dallas area. And what I loved most is I was part of a Young Life campaigners group. which you know is small groups in Young Life where you have Bible study every week. And she says, I was in that group with two other girls. And for all 4 years we were together. We were like sisters. And since I didn't have sisters at home, this was really important to me. And she said, now they stayed up in that community, but I moved 4 hours down here to San Antonio, but we have stayed in regular contact. So I was super, super, super excited about going to this 25th high school reunion. And so the time finally came, and I drove up, and on Thursday night we had the kind of opening kind of cocktail party, and everything was promising. It was very promising. She says, but by the next day, Friday, they began to distance themselves from me. The other two ladies began to distance themselves from me, and by the gala on Saturday night, they completely ostracized me. Wouldn't say one thing to me, not one thing. She says, I was crushed. And she says, on Sunday morning when I drove home, I wept all 200 miles of the trip. And when I got home, my sadness, of course, turned to anger. And my anger turned to victimization. I felt really singled out. And I was really, really angry. I was irate about that. And she said I was so disturbed by it that I couldn't concentrate on my work, and I certainly wasn't bringing my best to my family. So she said, I went to a therapist. I had to go to a therapist. And the therapist told me, you need to relinquish those relationships. You need to cut them off, and you need to try to erase that part of your past and just move on. Well, she said that didn't quite work for me. So she went to her pastor. She goes to a wonderful evangelical church here in town and got a great pastor. And the pastor did what you'd expect. He sat down and he prayed with her that she could forgive those who had trespassed against her. And they prayed long and hard. But still, she said, it just wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. So you know what she did? She woke up on a Monday morning, as so often we do. She woke up on Monday morning and says, today I'm going to do something about this. And she got on the phone and she called the other two ladies and said, I would like to meet with you alone. I'd like to come see you and meet with you alone. So she took a day off work. She drove 200 miles up to the Dallas area, and she met with one and then the other. And you know what she did? She said, I apologize. I hope that you will forgive me. Now, she didn't even know what she had done. She had no idea. But you know what she did? She died to her pride. She let her ego loose. And she was able to be reconciled to those two ladies. She let go of those things, and she grasped what lasts. The relationships that she so wanted to have with those two ladies. Seems upside down, doesn't it? But that's how life is in the greater reality. That's how it is. Jesus tries to tell us how to live in this reality. You may remember a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about this greater reality. And once we submit to the love of Christ, we're invited to live in this greater reality. And even though it seems like during the day we're pushed along by all the pressures anybody else is pushed along with and all the meanness and all that kind of stuff, we don't have to live there. We do not have to hang our hat in that reality. We can live in the greater reality. That's a fact. Wherever you work, whatever you do, whatever your family complexion's like, you can live in the greater reality. But beware, it's not like the rest of the world. In our world, winning is everything. Winning is everything, and if you're not winning, well, then you must be a victim. If you're not, somebody must be victimizing you because you're not winning. That is not the way of Christ. You know how telling it is. The central symbol of our faith is an object of defeat. You ever think about that? The central symbol of our faith, the cross, is a stark symbol of defeat. When they take Jesus to Calvary, the empire of Rome and the crooked bureaucrats say, hey, we chalked up a big victory, but it was short-lived, wasn't it? It was a short-lived victory. The only thing that lasts, really, is the love of Christ. That's all that lasts. The only thing that endures is His love that comes up from what is perceived as weakness, ends up being true greatness. You do realize that, right? We are called upon to love like that. Christ's sacrificial love must be demonstrated in you and me. St. Paul says it rather clearly. He says this in his second letter to the Corinthians. We always carry around in our body the death of Christ. We always carry around in our body the death of Christ, so that the life of Jesus may be revealed in our body. Now that's kind of a strange statement. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may be revealed in our body. He doesn't give us much wiggle room here. What he's saying is, that love that bubbles up from below, that love that comes from perceived weakness, that love that is all about sacrifice must be manifest in yours and my lives. It has to come to the top. It has to be seen, like Sophia's. You see? You know, the central passage in the entire New Testament is this. This is one if you don't do memory verses, this is one you should probably remember. I believe it's Romans 5:6. God shows His love for us in this way. God shows His love for us in this way. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Oh. Now think about it hard. When we were at our worst, when we had nothing to aggrandize ourselves about, when we were living in darkness, when we were the enemies not only of God, but the enemies of people around us, when we had reaped destruction, here, there, and yonder, Christ died for you and for me. That's the math of the gospel. That's how the power of what is perceived weakness becomes greatness. Love sacrificed on a cross, that must be manifest in your life and my life, or we're not manifesting the gospel at all. Now, I'm going to tell you, this does not come naturally. Don't you wish it did? Yeah, it doesn't come naturally. It's not part of being a natural woman, or a natural man. No. It is, in fact, unnatural. But what happens when you and I finally get sick of our selfish, egocentric, pride-filled, destructive selves, when we finally get tired of that person, good and tired of that person, then we'll submit to the love of Christ, because it's the only way to go. We're like that woman who finally on Monday morning says, I've had enough of me. And I'm sick of people telling me what's right. I know what's right. And what's right is for me to humble myself and go to my sisters. As our beloved Barbara Fry used to say, if you are not forgiving your sister or brother, guess who's in prison? It's not that person, it's you. It's you. And so she was sick of being in prison. And so she made the phone call. Because in that, we emulate our Lord. And so our Lord says in the Gospel of Luke, He says, if any of you want to come after me, if you want to come after me, if you dare want to follow me, deny yourself, take up your cross, and then follow me daily. Deny yourself and take up your cross daily and follow me. It's every day. We have to die to the old woman, the old man. It gets a little bit easier, but it has to happen every day. Sophia knows that. And a little second grader at James Madison knows this. This last week we started our snack pack program. And that's when we give food in little discreet bags for about 60 families that have nothing to eat in their cupboards or their refrigerator at home. Because you give to it. Okay? We try to be really careful about that because we don't want to stigmatize the little kids, right? So we told them the first year, this is for an experiment to see, this is a nutritional experiment to make sure, and you're part of a test. That didn't work. So now when I'm there and they're giving out the bags, they do it very quietly and just not to make a big show of it. Well, and we think the kids are just going to take it and put it on their arm and leave. Well, not this second grader. This second grader, it's time to give out the food. She marches up to the administrator. She took her bag and says, I'm proud. I'm the youngest in my family, and I'm doing something to help my mom and dad and brothers and sisters. Then she turned around, sat down, and finished her spelling. The great love of Christ comes up from those we think are the weakest, from those actions we think that are defeat. And what Sophia knows and what that little girl knows is only the sacrificial love of Christ. Only the sacrificial love of Christ is the food that endures. Let's stand.